Hey everyone, and welcome back to this module. We'll be taking a look over some of the officially recommended development approaches that sometimes don't even get followed in the official templates. We'll use this to specifically highlight the shortcomings of using strings to hard reference a directory location when we're working with loadable assets. So to get started, before we even jump over into the Unreal Engine or our project, what I wanted to show you, if you're not familiar with it, is this balancing blueprint and C++. So this is something that I've always tried to kind of pioneer whenever I discuss or make recommendations when working with Unreal. It's always been the way that, as far as I'm aware, Unreal have kind of intended the engine to be used, is a kind of well-balanced mixture of both Blueprint and C++. And then recently, in the last year or two, this documentation has been released, as well as a project that it is kind of supporting. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that project at the end of this module. What I wanted to show you though is if you come to this page, so again, this is just the standard documentation on the Unreal Engine. This will give you some examples and kind of use case scenarios of when you would want to use C++ or blueprints. So this is always going to be handy as well if you're ever wondering if something would be better suited and you're not too sure because maybe you're new to the engine. This documentation is very, very useful. So it has some of the kind of general concepts, such as what the C++ classes and functions are for, the way that you'd be intended to use them. And then we've got the versus section down below. And this is really where the strengths and weaknesses of each are discussed. And this is kind of where the course is going to be focusing as well. So we're going to be trying to improve our template project by only really just looking at what is in the documentation here, seeing what isn't done in the templates, where that is going to provide kind of negative development structures for us. And then we're just going to simply make the changes as would be recommended in this documentation. And we're going to see how much easier it will be to work with our project by the end of this course. So you've got some of the generic stuff here, like C++ is faster at runtime. We're going to have a look at that in a little bit later in a future section. Better for math, and again, that's going to be coming in what we do in this course. Something that we're not going to touch on too much is that network replication is going to be better in C++. So there are also some interesting topics that you can go into from this as well. It tells you how to convert your blueprints, and of course, it's got our benefits of blueprints as well. So fast iteration, better for the flow of working, flexible for editor usage. And again, we're going to go into all of this as we look through our codes. So if we keep scrolling down, we can go and see that we have performance concerns, the architecture notes, and this is the bit that I'm interested in, especially for this module. And what we're going to be looking at, as you've probably guessed by the title, is string references. And it says here, avoid referencing assets by string. And you're going to see why that is a problem by the end of this module. But I just find it quite funny that even the templates don't follow some of the advice given here. And it is something which can cause pretty big problems. Perhaps not if you're working purely by yourself, but you have to remember a lot of the time when you're learning to code and you're looking to get into a company and program for a company, you're not going to be working by yourself. And at the end of the day, a lot of the time as a programmer, your job isn't just to make a game or maybe a tool. Your job's going to be to make the jobs of other people easier. And if you're referencing things by string or hard referencing things purely in C++, you're going to be confusing the artists who just want to update something, and we'll see why by the end of this module. So with that said, over in the Unreal project that we've created, our stick template, all I've done is opened the twin stick pawn and the twin stick projectile because the hard referencing is actually done in both of the classes included in this project template. So now over in the code, let's have a look at what's happening. So this is in the pawn class, so this is controlling the actual player class. And we can see here we actually have two different hard references. So we've got one to the uStatic mesh, using the F object finder, and this is defining that the UFO model will be found specifically in the game folder, twin stick meshes, and it's called twin stick UFO. So when this is running on the constructor and it's setting or declaring and defining the uStatic mesh that will be used, not only is it declaring and defining the object itself. So this could just be a reference for a blueprint, which would be perfect, but it's also hard setting where that asset should be loaded from in the project. In a similar way, this is done just below for the usound base file. So this is for the twin stick fire sound. And again, that's referenced through the game, twin stick audio, and twin stick fire. So again, this is declaring and defining that asset type, the usound base, which is fine. But then it is hard setting it and kind of strictly referencing it through the string code here. I've also just quickly jumped over to the projectile class. Because of the way that I've zoomed this in, it's a little bit hard to see. In fact, I'll just drop this down. But what we have here, exactly the same thing. So again, if you're ever wondering how the meshes are set for the pawn and the projectile, this is all being done by string references. And again, this is just saying that the uStatic mesh, when it's being constructed or created, it should also use the asset found in the game folder twin stick meshes and find the twin stick projectile. So now we know how these are being loaded and how these are being set, because remember, all of the stuff here is done purely in C++. There isn't any blueprint in the project at the moment. The fallback of doing it this way and the reason that they recommend not doing it. And again, this is more of an example if you consider working with other people. If you're doing this yourself, you will probably remember not to change things. But again, as projects grow, if you've got a ton of string references, you may start forgetting that you put them there. You may start forgetting how something is meant to be updated. So again, this is more if you're working with the team and you'll find that maybe the artist has made an update with the pawn mesh. They've improved it, so they've got a V2 version. And what's likely to happen is that they'll come in, they will re-import their mesh. They may remove the old one, wanting to save space, and they've come in and they've called the UFO, twin stick UFO V2. Now, once you compile this, once you have this all updated through the system, they're not going to be aware perhaps that you've done this in C++. They may just think that this has been set up in the editor as would be expected, I think, in a lot of projects. And in fact, I think we'll just need to have quickly popped over to the IDE here. I'm just going to compile this through the IDE. And then if we go back to the editor, we can see that our spaceship has disappeared. So now, anytime that you've needed to recompile the project, or if we were to bring in a new version of our class, then this no longer knows what asset it's meant to be using for the static mesh, or it thinks it does, but it doesn't know it's been updated. And again, this will apply even if you just do something, because remember, this is hard referencing a folder structure as well. So if you change the name of a folder or move something from one folder to another. So again, let's just say that you take your projectile mesh out of the audio folder because it's there for some reason, or move the twin stick fire audio into another folder, then again, you've just broken that reference. And when you recompile this, you may have forgotten that that reference was there. You're going to go into play mode and you're going to be wondering why the fire sound effect isn't working anymore. So these are just a few of the kind of real world drawbacks that you can find from referencing things, especially assets directly through strings. And this is why the documentation page would recommend against this, especially in newer projects and the one that they're showing. So the other thing that I mentioned is that this is documentation which has been created for the Action RPG game. So you can see that this is nested just below the Action RPG page. You can download this from the Learn tab completely free. It's a really, really large, all-encompassing project though for blueprinting and C++ coding, and it shows a really good kind of balance of how to get almost a full game. This is showing things like ability systems. It's got the effects, the sounds. You've got the full flow from the main menu to a game to enemies to a win-lose state back to the menu. So this really has everything all in one place, and it's been done with a balance of C++ and Blueprint. So just to show that it doesn't need to be just one or the other, and this kind of puts this documentation then into use, as you can see these things actually being followed when nothing is string referenced. All of the maths is thrown in the C++ code, all of the visualizations are done in the blueprinting, and we're going to get more of a feel of that as we go through the course. But I would say if you've got time at any point, this is going to be some really useful documentation to go through. And also, if you've got the space and the time to look through that project, the Action RPG game is a really, really good learning example. So, in this module, we've gotten a better understanding of some of the more serious limitations of the template project in its current state and why certain procedures are kind of recommended against, even inside of the official documentation.